Welcome to this webinar series entitled Budget in conjunction with our Honorable Finance Minister announcement last 3 weeks ago on the 6th November 2020, right? Now for today's discussions, I will present, among others, these are the few key topics that I will be looking at. Among others, what are the key focus, what are the aim, the strategies that will be being adopted within this budget 2021. We also look at some of the national economic indicators, some of the figures which form part and parcel of this budget formation. Later on, we will look at some of the tax measurement and tax incentives which may impact the individual, firstly. Secondly, on the corporate tax, how it will affect the company level. In other words, both at the individual level and also as well as on the corporate level. And also I'll be looking at some of the sectoral and industrial outlook expectations with the implementation of this budget 2021. And of course, we'll close off this session with Q&A. I'll open up to the floor if there's any queries, doubts on further explanations that you may wish, you want me to elaborate further. Now, before I move to this, about this main issues first about this budget 2021, just to keep everyone updated. Now, based on yesterday's proceedings at the Parliament, the first level of the policy setting has been approved by all the MP of Parliament, meaning which, in other words, the first stage in the form of policy setting of the finance bill has actually been approved. Somehow, there will be two more stages involved, basically at the committee stage, and also the final reading expected to be on the December 17th. So in other words, that now only the first stage has been cleared. So it remains to be seen. So in other words, this budget will still remain as proposal until December 17th, where the final bill will be further deliberated and will be whether it will be approved by the Parliament. Now, this year's budget is a very exceptional budget in a way, because due to the adverse conditions that the whole world, in fact, are suffering now, because it's basically an unprecedented event, and with people life are being affected, and of course, our economy are also badly in bad shape in a way. In a way, this so-called spreading of this COVID-19 has also disrupted a lot of disruptions to the business ecosystem. Others due to the slowdown in the world trade, and it will affect our so-called revenue stream. Now, in fact, this year we are expecting to have a recession as projected by IMF to hit about 4.4 retraction, right? So in a way, the situation now is in a very critical stage, whereby it affects the whole economic system. Now, to counter all these adverse conditions, our government has actually come out with this budget 2021. It is crafted based on the theme of resilient as one, together with Trump. In other words, the government is trying to utilizing this budget 2021 to inbuild everyone from the individual to the company, so that it can able to trump over the adverse effect from this COVID-19 spreading. Now, there are three so-called pillars of this budget 2021, being the rakyat's well-being, which is the people's well-being. That's first. Secondly, the business continuity, and of course, to focus on the economic resilience. In other words, this budget 2021 is crafted with these three sustainability to reduce the urban and rural development gap, and of course, to ensure that to uphold the values to shape the economy. Now, looking further at these three main goals and strategies, what are the strategies involved? In other words, what are the steps that has been crafted based on this budget 2021 for the first goal of taking care of the people's well-being? In other words, that the key focus is understanding the current people's problems now, the worries and the woes currently suffered by our people, especially those who lost their income and also have cut in their income revenue. The strategies that has been outlined, which will include so-called focus on to combat this COVID-19 pandemic, and also to generate more jobs, and also to ensure the well-being of the rakyat are practically protected. Next objective, which is on business continuity, so that to ensure that the investment, they are being accelerated to push forward the investment, to strengthen strategic sectors, and also to improve access to financing. Now, what are the strategies involved? Which basically to drive, to encourage more investment and to strengthen some key sectors, and of course, key with priority given to automation and digitalizations, and of course, providing access to financing. The third objective, which is economic resilience, the key focus will be ensure that there's an inclusive and meaningful socio-economic development towards a more prosperous and dignified society by 2030. This is also in line with the objective of the 12 Malaysia plan. So in other words, that to achieve this, one of the strategies outlined is to put forth this budget, which is so-called an expansionary budget with high spending to stimulate the economy. Now, this budget 2021, the total worth is 322 billion. In fact, one of the largest ever being announced by our government. This chart will shows where are the sources, how we derive 322 billion. Now, basically, there are four components of them, which is the borrowings, non-tax revenue, indirect tax, and income tax, which will generate the 322 billion. Now, on the other side, how it will be spent. Now, basically, 73% of it will be spent on the operating expenditure. There's also a new so-called allocation for the COVID-19 fund, which previously not been assigned. That constitutes 5%. And the balance, 21% will be for development expenditure purposes. If you look at basically the spending part, the main bulk of it used to pay off the emoluments, the so-called salary emoluments of the civil society, which constituting 26%. The next big chunk of it will be, of course, the 12% used to service to pay off the debt itself. Now let's look at the sources of revenue, from where it derived. The government has derived the funds that will be so-called arrive at the government coffers to so-called finance this 322 billion government expenditure. Basically, direct tax. Now, what are direct tax? The direct tax is basically involving the corporate tax, personal income tax, and also the petroleum tax, which actually forecast next year will be the proceed will be around 132 billion. Now, take note that this next year itself, one of the so-called setback is that the petroleum income tax has actually been reduced due to the of the oil prices. If you compare to 2019, it's 134 billion. Next year expected will be lower. Basically, what are they? In the form of import duty, excess duty, particularly around we maintain about 15 million. SST, sales and service tax, also quite stable at around 28 billion. For non-tax revenue, basically they are in the form of non-tax items that collected by the government, which include basically the investment dividend of investment from the government. Expected collection from this fund tax revenue will be about 63 billion. So totaling up total revenue for next year, expectation to be so-called collected by the government will be in the region of 237. Now let's look at some of revenue, which is just now the direct taxes. If you match with the operating expenditure and development expenditure and plus funding for the COVID-19 fund deficit, right? Now this deficit, of course, we will be funded by ways of borrowings. The deficit of this so-called 86 billion deficit, it will be by percentage, will be around 5.4% of our GDP. In terms of debt, will be around 58% of our GDP. Our external debt expectation will be hitting around 1.2 trillion worth of debt. But for next year, it will be much more so-called the upbeat for next year will be much more higher with expectation of positive growth in the region between 6.5 to 7.5% GDP. Compared to this year, which the expectation will be recording a negative growth of 4.5%. So you're lowest that this year we will be in a recession stage. Of course, there will be strong rebound. I mentioned this now for next year to hit basically around 6 to 7% GDP growth. Now let's look at some of the initiatives and measures to assist the rakyat and also the company itself, right? Now let's look at it will be so granted to the individual itself, right? Now first and foremost, of course, this is actually a good news. Basically, it's a reduction in the tax rate by 1% for those earnings of chargeable income band in between 50,000 to 70,000. Now this benefit is actually targeted at especially those M40 group, those earnings around the region of about 5,000 per month and above. So in other words, that those who fell within this broadband range, the income rate charge will be reduced by 1%. Of course, it will take effect next year onwards. Now let's look at some of the calculations. Especially if you fall within 50,000 and 70,000 in terms of your chargeable income, you will get a net savings of 200. So in other words, that your income tax payable will be reduced by 200, which apply across the board for those earning at least 50,000 of his chargeable income right to the maximum. So net savings is 200 for the year. Now you notice that for those who fell, those low-income earners who don't seem to enjoy this so-called reduction in the tax rate bracket, because this one, as per the government has announced, all these so-called B40 group will qualify for the so-called cash aid, which I will discuss later. Now, next will be the so-called in terms of the increase in terms of the limit for the expenditure that you spend for medical treatment purposes or any specific needs for your parental care, right? Knowing the fact that now health is the key point now, because in other words that our government want us to ensure that we are in tip-top health conditions, and in order to so-called provide relief for these health matters, the government has actually proposed to increase in terms of the income tax relief limit for those spending for medical treatment purposes or any specific needs or parental care. So the limit now will be up from 5,000 to 8,000. Of course, this will take effect for starting next year, YA 2021. In addition, besides the medical treatment expenses for oneself, your own, your spouse, and also your child, that are also being included as well. The limit has actually been so-called increased and it revised up from 6,000 to 8,000. The medical checkup, if you undergo a medical checkup for yourself, previously is 500, meaning which if your medical checkup bill up to 500, you can claim relief. But now, starting next year, it has been increased to 1,000 limit. There's another additional criteria, so-called coverage, which in a way, a specific 1,000 will be allocated if you spend, if you seek certain medical expenses, which may expanded to include so-called vaccination. It also will be so-called entitled for this so-called tax relief, but only limited to 1,000, either for the taxpayer, the self, or your spouse, or your child. Of course, this will kick off next year, YA 2021. The handicapped persons, they are not neglected by government. For those spouse who are disabled spouse, the so-called limit now has been increased from the present 3,005 to 5,000, kick off next year, YA 2021. But only applicable for disabled in nature. So in other words, that you fall under the OKU category, you qualify for this. Now this is just an extension. The limit is still the same. In other words, that any contribution to the private retirement scheme or PRS, it has been extended. Officially, it will be ending this year itself. But the government has decided to extend it for another 4 years, from the year 2022 to the year assessment 2025. Now, what is private retirement scheme? Basically, it's a private scheme organized by the private sector. Is in so-called is an optional, and also in addition to our existing government fund, which is EPF, so that the public can actually gather the so-called right funds to face their retirement stage. The limit, of course, is only relief. The limit is actually has been up from previously 2005 has been increased to 3,000. In other words, the additional amount of 500 is being allocated. Now, basically, what this lifestyle coverage expenses will cover, among others, if you buy sports equipment or you join a gym, or as long as you involve in some sporting activities, or even purchasing of so-called ICT equipments, or even subscription to internet. The additional item that included as part of this lifestyle now is, of course, subscription to the e-newspaper. In other words, if you subscribe newspaper via the internet, via online, you also be covered part of this relief lifestyle. I think this move is very timely, of course, especially at this critical period where a lot of people are moving towards online. Kick-off starting will be beginning next year, YA 2021. Another extension, basically referring to the income tax relief for those contribution to the SSPN, or so-called the National Education Savings Scheme. The limit still remain the same, which is 8,000. Any net savings deposited into this SSPN fund will also qualify for the income tax relief. This is mainly an extension effective 2021 to 2022. Now, some of you may not be aware of this SSPN, so-called. Now, this is a savings initiated by government. If you have a child who wish to undertake tertiary educations, you can start savings now so that they can have the right funds to fund their tertiary educations. the limit I mentioned, 8,000 per year, it still stands. Somehow it has to be a net savings form. This is another so-called good news, especially if you wish to upgrade your skills, especially at this time where a lot of people start to lose their job, may wish to rehabilitate or may wish to upgrade their skills, right? Now, the current relief at this moment is still 7,000. In other words, at this 7,000, if you undergo certain courses or degree program, or even master or PhD program, you qualify for 7,000 so-called income tax relief amount. In addition to this, there's a 1,000 limit that has been provided. Now, what this 1,000 limit will qualify, as long as you undertake some courses, of course, these courses must be in the form of upskilling and improvement in the self-assessment course. And of course, it must be so-called approved by the Department of Skills Department, Ministry of Human Resources. In other words, that you wish to upgrade your skills by attending this course, worth up to 1,000, you qualify to claim for this tax relief. Effective year will be 2021 and 2022. Now, this is a summary of what are the changes that have taken place. Firstly, there are two combination. One is the same limit, but extension of time, and the other is the revision in the limit itself. For medical expenses, of course, the limit has been up 5,000. For medical expenses, will still be increased to 1,000. Disabled spouse, handicapped person, also increased to 5,000. And the rest, in terms of the savings in your PRS, still maintained. It's just that the extension of the period. Lifestyle also increased, extra 500. Net deposit in the SPM also in terms of extension of the period, and of course those educational fees. If you enroll in certain courses to upgrade yourself, but limit to 1,000, you do qualify for the so-called tax relief. During this time, where perhaps there are certain people who may have lost their job, right? But of course, they will be compensated. In terms of compensation that they receive from their employer, in terms of income tax exemption now has also increased from the present 10,000 for each year of service to 20,000, as long as that the same individual serve in the same company or within the companies within the group. This will take effect for the year assessment 2020 and 2021. Tax incentive for equity crowdfunding. This is another new initiative. I believe the government will wish to expand our capital market. This is also a good opportunity if those so-called newly set up who wish to so-called need expansion, need capital seed to fund their expansion. Those investors who invest in all this via the equity crowdfunding, there will be income tax exemption on 60% of the investment amount, but of course with the limit of 50,000, and also cap limit up at 10% of the aggregate income. Of course, the investor as well as the investment company, and also the amount to be invested must be, of course, verified and certified by the Security Commission of Malaysia. This will take effect next year, 2021 to 2023. Now, the government is fully aware that the property sector or the real estate sector are in so-called in a down stage, whereby there's still a lot of overhang properties. In order to overcome such this so-called overhang of properties, especially to encourage, especially those first-time owners to own their first property, the stamp duty has been waived. In terms of the limit, now has been increased from previously 300,000 to 500,000. Now, this stamp duty, meaning in other words that the stamp duty liable for all the legal documents involved, which are the two legal documents, basically referring to the instrument of transfer and the loan agreement, will actually be waived off as long as the value of your first home is not more than half a million. The period coverage will be extended for 5 years for those legal documents that's been signed from 1st Jan 2021 to 31st December 2025. In other words, that they are free of stamp duty liability for all these legal documents. This is a summary, the date that the legal documentations, as long as within 2021 to 2025 and is below half a million, there will be 100% exemption. Currently, the limit is only 300,000 and below. So next year effective, it will cover more it's been up to half a million. This initiative is actually, like I said, to encourage more homeowners, especially first-time homeowners. The extension of the stamp duty not only limited to the legal documentation in respect of the purchasing of the first home ownership, but also extended to those so-called documents related to those abandoned projects. In other words, that previously those abandoned projects that has been abandoned. Sorry to recap that again. The stamp duty for the purchasing ownership of the first-time buyers not only limited will be exempted, not only limited to that, but also will be covering in respect of those property purchase involving those abandoned housing projects. This initiative by the government actually to revive, to encourage, to relive back all those abandoned housing projects. Same concept, those legal documents that to be executed from 1st Jan 2021 to 31st December 2025 for these abandoned housing projects, their stamp duty also will be waived altogether. Extension will be for the next 5 years. Of course, this amendment project has to be certified by the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. Whereas the stamp duty for the those involving the purchasing of the insurance coverage will also be waived off This is also to assist those low-income earners who actually need coverage for their insurance. The stamp duty involved in this, their certificates issued will also be accepted. Kick-off period from 1st Jan 2021 will last until 31st December 2025. In a move also to encourage more, especially those low-income earners, to get insurance coverage for themselves. Next, another incentive, but this only relate to non-resident individual. It does not cover our own Malaysian resident. It's only covered to non-resident individuals. Now, what does this scheme involve? Currently, non-resident individual will be subject to a flat 30% income rate. But those individuals who earn basically more than 25,000 and also who hold senior positions with a company that just relocated their operations to Malaysia. So their earnings will be subject to 15%, which is half of the conventional individuals. Of course, there's a limitations. Each company is only, for each company, only 5 non-resident individuals will be entitled to. Effective date, of course, will be depends on the approval from MIDA. Will be from 7 November 2020, which is also already running, to next year, 31st December 2021. Extension of period of tax deduction for employment of senior citizens, ex-COVID, parole supervised person, and ex-drug dependents. If you are any of these so-called category of persons, especially senior citizens, and you are being employed by the company, and as long as your pay is less than 4,000, the company involved will be entitled for double tax deductions. As you are fully aware, before this, the other category, which is disabled person, they are also subject to double tax, right? But now it cover more category of person, especially senior citizens, whereby as long as it's below 5,000 remuneration, the company can claim for double deductions. Effective assessment will be next year, 2021 till 2025. This is also initiative taken by the government to encourage more employer to employ, especially senior citizens who are still rich in talent and experience, rather than just left idyllic, to encourage more employment of this category of persons, especially senior citizens, which is beyond the age of 60. Imposition of excise duties on electric cigarette. At this present moment, we're fully aware that normal cigarette or so-called conventional cigarette, they are entitled for, they are so-called subject to so-called the sin tax, which is the so-called the duty tax, right? But does not cover those electronic cigarette type, right? But now, starting next year, 1st January 2021, those e-cigarette, which is among others, item like wipes, they will also be subject to excise duty. The rate is about 10% ad valorem, and either that or 40 cents per milliliter. Now, the initiative of this is actually to be so-called equal. In other words, that now tax will be so-called imposed on both conventional cigarette and as well as electronic cigarette. So it's a neutral tax to all forms of cigarette. Accommodation booked through online platform. Currently, at this moment, those tourists who stay in a hotel, they will be subject to 10 ringgit per night per stay. But of course, now of the pandemic, during the Bencana program, this has been waived off. But starting next year, 1st Jan 2021, if you book your hotel accommodation via online, for instance, you go to Agoda to book your accommodation, or for that matter, the accommodation now will also cover those Airbnb type of accommodations. They now will be subject to this tourism tax. In other words, that this is also to even out, so that both bookings via online or via so-called physical bookings will also be subject to this tourism tax of 10 ringgit per night. So regardless whether online bookings or online bookings or physical bookings itself, will also be subject to this tourism tax. But cost effective will be only kick off second half of 2021. Now let's look at some of the, one of them is of course the contributions, so-called employee contributions, almost our in and limited to EPF as form part of EPF contributions. But now the rate has actually been lower to 9%, which is effective January 21 for a period of 12 months. But take note, this is an option. If you wish to stick to back to 11%, you can also maintain that, but you can your individual pay. So you can start. You can actually liaise with your personnel department to sign off the form to allow whether if you want to maintain back your 11% contribution. For EPF withdrawal, the initial announcement was one can withdraw up to 6,000 from your account one, right? Account one is of course comprising 70% of your balance. Now, just to recap back again, so minimum employee contribution will be lowered to 9%. Next will be the in terms of a withdrawal eligibility from your account one balance. Account one balance basically comprising 70% of your contribution to EPF. You are allowed to make a withdrawal up to a limit of 6,000 for a period of 12 months, which each month a limit of 500 being set, right? Now, based on yesterday's proceedings, when our Honorable Finance Minister winding up the debate, he has actually revised this so-called initiative. The amount now has been increased to 10,000. In other words, there's a one-off withdrawal of 10,000. This especially to cater for those in need of funds, especially those people who have lost their income or even have so-called have a pay to 10,000 withdrawal eligibility from your account one balance. Now, let's not entitled for the 1% tax rate reduction in a way because they are qualified for all this so-called cash aid from the Bantuan Prihatin Rakyat. This is especially catered for those B40 group, which the household income which which below 5,000 amount, right, per month. So the payout 1,002 depends on the household income that they earn, and of course based on the number of child being survived. Total amount allocation is 6.5 billion. And expectation of this payout will be somewhere in January next year. Internet connectivity, the government is fully aware that especially at this time where a lot of people, whether business or individual, they correspond to the internet. So knowing this fact of going online, total amount of allocation of 1.5 billion has actually been provided, and there's also for each individual there's a form of credit being provided, but no news as to how this credit of 180 enhancement of the employment insurance scheme starting next year. This job search allowance will be extended by 3 months, which is subject to a rate of 80% of the monthly salary for the first month, 50% for the second to 6 months, and subsequently 30% of the last 3 months. This insurance scheme is actually applicable for those people who have lost their job and in search of new jobs. Introduction of this My Step. Now, what's My Step? My Step is this form of short-term employment program. Knowing the fact that the government, knowing the fact that there will be a high employment expected. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, our employment rate is about almost 4.9%. So with this program, they'll be offering 50,000 contract employment opportunities, both in the public and as well as the government-linked GLC companies. And this initiative is to provide job employment opportunities. Targeted wage subsidy program. This program is initiated by actually to so-called to subsidize the wages, but it's only targeted towards the tourism and the retail sector industry only. The rate subsidized is 600 per month. Those who qualify only for those employees with an earning of monthly salary of 4,000 and below. This initiative, again, very good initiative to help out, especially those companies who in deep financial positions, who can't afford to pay off their staff. Ye Belia program, this is a good initiative. This only opens to youth aged between 18 to less than 20. Now, what this program entails, this is actually to promote cashless society. You know that payment to be made online, meaning which there will be a one-off 50 ringgit amount to be credited into the e-wallet. I believe this system, how it works, is something similar like previously that the government has announced. The same credit amount for those, but that was only applied to working adults who earn less than 100,000. But now the youth segment, which is previously neglected, now they will also provide a 50 ringgit credit in the form of e-wallet for the youth. For the corporate tax, these are the measures that has been proposed during the budget 2021 announcement. There are actually 6 initiatives. This mainly to cater for those companies who want to invest in Malaysia and those specialized industries which qualify for some tax incentive. Now, for those companies who relocate their operations to Malaysia and also to undertake new investments, the government has actually provide certain incentive, but on conditions that the so-called they must relocate their operations into Malaysia and also to undertake new investment, and also so there are certain category that in a way that they must adopt the IR4 and also the adaptation of the digitalization technology. Now, this initiative is a very good move because in a way with high investment, you will create a multiple effect to the economy. Now, what are the tax incentives provided? If it's a new company who just invested in, the income tax rate will be between 0 to 10% for a period of 10 years. Anything for existing company, with new services segment, the income tax rate will be chargeable, will be 10% for a period of up to 10 years. It's a very attractive tax rate bracket imposed compared to the conventional corporate tax rate of 24%. Now, when it will be effective will be until next year, until 31st December 2022, as long as the application is approved by the MIDA. To qualify for this, of course, they must fulfill certain criteria. Of course, they must be in the manufacturing sector and also adopting the IR4 and also adaptation of digital technology, right? And also activities like R&D, those cloud computing, medical devices, these will qualify for the either 10% or zero rated for a period of the first 10 years and also the subsequent 10 years. Importantly is, of course, all these must be obtained approval from MIDA. For those manufacturing companies involving in pharmaceutical products, which will include vaccines, same rate, attractive tax rate will be applicable, rate of 0 to 10% for the first 10 years, and income tax rate of 10% for the subsequent period of 10 years will also be available for those Malaysian manufacturers of pharmaceutical products, which include vaccines. This will encourage them to invest in Malaysia, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic period. Effective date will be from, in fact, it's already running now, 7 November 2020 to 31st December 2022. Of course, the application must be approved by MIDA. For those companies who undertake R&D activities, in an effort to encourage more R&D activities, to have a more competitive R&D ecosystem, the government has also provided some more tax incentive to encourage more companies to venture into these R&D activities. What are these tax incentives which are available for them? Basically in the form of tax deduction and as well as income tax exemption of 100% of the statutory income for 10 years. Again, it must be approved by MIDA from 7 November 2020 to 31st December 2025. Tax incentive for global trade center. What is this global trading center? As long as you also be given a special press for a period of 5 years, and of course you will also be renewable for another 5 years. Approval must be granted by MIDA from 1st January 2021 to 31st December 2022. For those manufacturers located at the industrial zone and also the licensed manufacturing warehouse, LMW, to so-called improve the company's competitiveness and also to meet the global trade dynamics, it has been proposed that 10% limit on the sales value from value added and additional activities to be increased do not exceed 40% of the company's annual sales value. This initiative will be effective from 7 November 2020. Special income tax treatment for non-resident individual. Those non-resident individuals who hold certain key positions in those companies that has been relocated to Malaysia, we also qualify for a flat rate of 15% instead of a conventional 30%. Of course, there are a few restrictions to it. This 30% tax rate will only be imposed as long as the salary is not less than 25,000, must be more than that, and also the each company will only limited to 5 non-resident individuals. When will be effective date? It will be it's approved by MIDA from 7 November 2020 till 31st December 2021. Principal hub, you set up a business within this principal hub. It also in a way government to encourage more setting up of business within this principal hub. Taxi. For those export of private healthcare services, those promote these private healthcare services and also the tax equivalent to 100% of the value of the increase in export now has been set off against 70% of the statutory income derived from the export. The period involved will be Y8. Next, we look at some of the expected outcome of certain sectors, certain industry, with the implementation of the current budget. With the initiative by the government to allocate about 1 billion to fight off, especially the third wave of the COVID-19. This allocation has been provided to the purchasing of PPE and also some hand sanitizers. Now, these are the beneficiaries which so-called will be expected to benefit from this spending for these PPE items. Of course, those companies which have diversified into the production of PPE. Companies involved will include Comocap, Notion, Prolilex, and Kylie Holdings. In fact, nowadays, knowing the fact that these PPE items are in great demand, especially worldwide, a lot of companies have started to venture into the production of all these PPE items. Next will be those high-profile mega projects. The government has also ensured that this mega project that has been started off will still continue to so-called activities of these high mega projects will still be carried out by allocation of 15 billion to some of these mega projects, which include the MRT3, the Johor Bahru Singapore Rapid Transit System. Now, these mega projects are also, in a way, they are quite useful in a way that they have multiplier effect to the growth of the economy. Of course, construction-related companies like Gamuda, MMC, George Ken, Bina Putri, Gabungan AQRS, those are the subcontractors for all these mega projects. They will be the expected beneficiaries from the injection of this 15 billion as a form of transport infrastructure development program. Government fully aware that internet connectivity is the so-called as the impetus for good communication among the companies and individual. Amount of 7.4 billion has actually been allocated to build and upgrade the broadband service. Will be smooth. This amount is actually with Malaysian communication and multimedia communication companies. They are expected to benefit from these allocations. Will be among others Telecom, Maxis, Digi, and Axiata. To encourage more home ownership, especially for those first-time ownership, the amount also has been increased from 3,000 to 5,000, which will last until year-end 2025. This initiative is actually ownership at the same time overhang properties in the market at this moment. Of course, established property developers, they're expected to benefit from this so-called waiver of the stamp duty, will be among others Ecoworld, SP Setia, Samdabi, IOI, Marsing, and Titi Jaya. Strengthening of the national defense, the government has actually allocated 60 billion for the defense ministry and 17 billion for the home ministry to strengthen the security situations of the nations. Another 2.3 also has been will be allocated for the maintenance of the assets of the Malaysian Armed Force. Of course, this spending, of course, will benefit those listed company involving in the maintenance of the armed force, the assets of the Malaysian Armed Forces, which include Destiny and the Posted Heavy Industries. For those high-tech and value-added firms, knowing the fact that they are the so-called the future of the growth of the industry, the government has actually allocated amount of 1 billion incentive, right, to grow the domestic high technology industry. This fund is actually, among others, to support the R&D investment, especially in aerospace and as well as the electronic clusters. Potential beneficiaries, which are those listed companies, which are also semiconductor-related companies like Inari, Victrox, and UWC, will definitely benefit from this fund allocation of 1 billion. There will also be a sales tax exemption for the purchase of bus in order to encourage to reduce the burden of bus operators. The government has actually announced to waive off the sales tax exemption, meaning which there will not be any sales tax imposed for those purchasing of the locally assembled bus. Of course, the listed bus companies like Consortium Transnational and Gets Global Berhad, they will benefit from this sales tax exemption. There will also be a stricter regulations and removal of tax-free sectors of cigarette. In other words, that to tighten up the so-called to ensure that the smuggling of especially illicit cigarettes to contain deaths. The government has actually announced a lot of initiatives, among others, the issue of new import license, tightening the renewal of import license, transshipment of cigarettes to dedicated ports only, and making cigarettes and tobacco products as taxable goods in all duty-free island and any free trade zones. So in other words, that starting next year, those duty-free area like Tioman, Langkawi, will all those cigarette available there will no more be so-called tax-free. It will be taxable. Of course, being the sole listed tobacco company, BAT, they may be affected by this removal of this tax-free status of cigarette. So in other words, cigarette now consider will be a taxable item, no more as a tax-free status. With that, I conclude my presentations on the budget 2021. Just to round up the overall on these presentations of this budget 2021, my personal view, of course, basically with a huge spending of 322 billion, initiative by the government is actually a wise move, especially at this time where the economy are being hit by the pandemic virus COVID-19, with a slowdown, loss of employment, stricken by the this so-called unprecedented era. I think it's timely to inject in 302 billion into the economy to pump prime the economy, so that and also at the same time strengthen up our ecosystem so that you can move forward and recover back to our new usual self as previously. So with that, I conclude my presentations on this budget 21, and I open to the floor for any Q&A. You may type your questions, queries onto the Q&A chat box. Okay, I got one question here from Ong. Yes, you have stated a very so-called valid questions, which you mentioned that the assumptions which built into the budget 2021 with the expectation for the economy to grow in between 6.5% to 7.5% growth for next year, right? Of course, it's based on this rate, it's actually a bit so-called over-ambitious. I would say that if you look at the latest data that's been announced, so-called the second quarter, our economy fell by 17.1%, right? The third quarter, which just recently announced, still negative 2.7%. And of course, bear this in mind, now we are still in a CMCO stage. So basically, I look at the situations now to have recovered so-called drastically from the current recession period to a positive 6.5 to 7.5%. I would say that it's a bit too over-ambitious. That's my personal comment. But of course, the budget 2021 was built based on this so-called boom period of boom growth of 6.5 to 7.5% growth. Now, yesterday, like I mentioned, at the policy stage, it has been passed, it has been approved. Next stage will be the committee stage, whereby there will be further deliberation, there will be further voting. That is the second stage. the final stage, which is the final reading, which falls on the December 17th. That will be so-called deliberated, and decision will be made, so-called made by the MPs at the Parliament stage. Now, it's just assuming that if the budget is being rejected, meaning which it will not be gazetted, in a way, the budget may be reviewed and represented again. Committee is just the second stage. There will be a final reading stage on this December 17th, to take note. Yesterday is the first stage, which is the policy stage. Your questions, do you encourage people to buy assets during this pandemic, as the government give a lot of financial assistance now? Of course, like just now I mentioned, among the financial assistance is in the form of exemption of so-called stamp duty. And recently, during the Penjana program, there's also waiver of the RBGT. What's RBGT? Real property gain tax. In other words, that if you dispose of your property beyond 5 years, there will not be a tax. There will be tax exemptions. Of course, it depends on the situations. Basically, of course, I would say that in the property sector is actually so-called is a cyclical situations. You move up and down, right? So of course now looking at the price of the property now is actually at a very low stage. Of course, depends on your so-called investment appetite. If you have the excess cash, of course, it's an opportunity actually to invest in all these so-called attractive assets, which has a very low price situations, right? And also, of course, besides investment, you may wish, just now those, especially those first-time owners, you may use to take this opportunity to own your own house. With this expansionary budget and high spending, how is the government going to repay the debt? Which is also a very valid question. Just how I mentioned, this budget will trigger almost a 6% deficit, right? So of course, at this moment, with this so-called structure of the budget, our government debt now is around 1.2, in fact, almost reaching 1.3 trillion amount, which basically, which is quite a high amount, right? Now, bear this in mind, you must understand that our government also have allocated a certain percentage towards so-called so-called capital expenditure. Now, these expenses is actually incurred to activate the economy, so that to trigger this multiplier effect, so that to activate the economy, so that you have sufficient funds to repay off the debts. Now, you must also remember that this budget deficit is very common, not only in Malaysia, but in somewhere else, in other countries as well, in US, in Singapore, because they need actually to have heavy spending to activate the economy. Because of insufficient lack of so-called tax revenue, they resort to borrowing with the hope that in the future, the economy can be greatly activated and to generate back the income to repay off the future debts. To your question, do you think opposition MPs will reject at committee stage? This one we have to wait until the outcome of the deliberations and the decisions made by the MPs. It's not for me to comment on this. It's the decisions to be supported or rejected by the MPs. Any further questions or comments about the budget? Now, if you have further queries or any doubts, you can also contact me by email at this as per shown in the screen itself. With that, I conclude my webinar session. I wish, thank you very much for being my audience for these sessions. In my parting words, stay safe and stay healthy.